True peace. What is it? What isn't it? How do we get it? These are questions we all face, and we all kind of wonder about these things. We have an idea of what peace is, but we really don't know exactly what it is. And so this is what the Apostle Paul is going to talk about in Philippians chapter 4 this morning. When I was little, there was a great game show on TV. It's called The Love Connection. And Chuck Lowry, I think, was the host of The Love Connection. I can't remember what his name was, but it was great because of how they put these couples together. They would have, in the span of the show, they'd have a girl that would come up, and she would choose between three guys. And they would have a little video segment up there. They'd play a little bit of information about them. You had some questions, you had some answer. There was some dialogue between these three guys. And then they would go on a date. The girl would pick one of the guys. They would go on a date. It was kind of like the old school version of The Bachelor, The Bachelorette a little bit, kind of tamed down version of it, of course. But the date, of course, was the linchpin. It was the event that would make or break the couple. You could answer all the questions well. You could make a great impression with the girl, or if it was a guy, the girl could make a great impression on the guy. And you could be picked for the date. But the date was kind of like, it was like the fourth quarter in football. The date revealed who you really were. In the date, your true nature would come out. There was no more smoke and mirrors. There was nothing to wonder about. The date was your true colors. And you would really figure out what this other person was and who they were when you went on the date. I want you to listen really carefully. Nothing in life will reveal your true nature and who you really are like conflict. Nothing will do it. Nothing will reveal your true colors like how you deal with conflict. Conflict with other people, conflict in your marriage, conflict with your friends, conflict at work. Nothing reveals who you really are like how you deal with conflict. And Ken Sande says it so well. He says, although many Christians and their churches believe they have held on to God's word as their standard for life, their responses to conflict, among other things, reveal that they have in fact surrendered much ground to the world. And he continues, he says, instead of resolving differences in a distinctively biblical fashion, they often react to conflict with the same avoidance, manipulation, and control that characterizes the world. In effect, both individually and congregationally, they have given to the world's postmodern standard, which is what feels good to me, what sounds true to me, what seems beneficial to me. Philippians 4, the Apostle Paul, in so many words, is going to say, nothing reveals, if you have true peace, like how you deal with conflict in your life. Nothing does it like conflict. There will come a day, there's come a day in my life, and Brandy's life as well, when you will come to a pastor, inevitably, because you're dealing with a conflict. And my goal as a pastor is never to bring an end to your conflicts. You come to me, you got an issue in your marriage. My goal is not to bring an end to the conflict. My goal is to see your heart given to Christ through the conflict. True peace in your life is not found in the absence of conflict. True peace is found in the midst of conflict, in the middle of it. You can have true peace. Philippians 4, 1 through 9, Paul discusses true peace. If you want to find true peace, there's no magical formula to it, but there are some essentials that go along with it. And the first is this: you must be resolved to deal with conflict. You cannot sweep it under the rug. You cannot pass it over. You have to be resolved to deal with conflict. Don Schultz's quotes are just coming into my mind as we speak. Problems don't get better by age or neglect. They're not like a fine wine. They're not like Italian leftovers. Sometimes you throw them in the microwave, they taste a little bit better the second time around. Problems, conflicts don't get better with age or neglect. You have to be resolved to deal with them in your life. A Christian should be resolved to deal with conflict no matter what the situation is. Number 2, you rejoice in conflict. Verses 4 through 7. Number 3, you reorder your thinking and you reorder your loves in conflict. Verses 8 and 9. Here's number 1 this morning in Philippians chapter 4. as we read is there's a resolve. We must be resolved to deal with conflict. Look at verse 1, Philippians chapter 4. Therefore, my brothers, whom I love and I long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm thus in the Lord, my beloved. I entreat Euodiah and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I also ask you, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are written in the book of life. And before we plunge into the conflict here, I want you to see Paul's pastoral heart for the people, for the church in Philippi. Look at the terms he uses and how he addresses not only these two women, but also all the others. My brothers. These are people he loves. He longs for them. That Greek word longs for is a hapax. It's one time that it occurs in the New Testament, right there in Philippians chapter 4, verse 1. It expresses a deep emotional concern. One man calls it a homesick tenderness. He longs for them. He waits to see these people. He loves them. They're his joy. They are his crown. And when Paul calls them that, he turns our thoughts to end times. His relationship with these people has eternal ramifications. It's not just temporary. It has eternal significance to it. They're his beloved, his true companions, his fellow workers. Their names are in the book of life. Like what one commentator says about the transition from chapter 3 earlier in the book of Philippians to these verses right here in chapter 4, he says, immediately Paul changed his tone in these verses. The previous passage contains all the emotion of the argumentation, but now he spoke with the warmth of a dear friend. He's not coming to strangers here. He's coming to his companions. These are fellow workers in the gospel. And he's pleading with them in the midst of conflict. He comes right alongside. One more observation. As Paul doesn't just address these two ladies, Euodiah and Syntyche, in Philippians chapter 4. He addresses the whole church. And the whole church is commanded to stand firm. One of Paul's favorite military terms throughout all of the New Testament, to stand firm. In the midst of conflict, you stand firm in the Lord. You stand firm in the gospel. And there's a great key through this passage all about dealing with conflict and how we encounter conflict. And it's this: how you handle conflict is a direct reflection about what you believe about the gospel. Paul is going to take every single conflict that emerges in your life, every problem that you have, and he takes it to the gospel. It might not be directly about the gospel, but how you handle it is about the gospel. And so what you do in conflict really reveals what you think about the gospel of Jesus Christ. There's no way around that in Paul's thinking. He takes a conflict that might not have been about the gospel, and he says the way you handle it is about the gospel. There was contention between these two women. There was disunity. Something was going on in the context. Paul specifically mentions them by name. And you think about 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians is the book of problems. It's the church that's got all kinds of chaos going on. You don't see a whole lot of names mentioned in the book of 1 Corinthians at all. Here in Philippians chapter 4, Paul mentions two women by name, and this is just stunning when you compare the rest of the New Testament. Why does he specifically mention them by name? And I don't know, here's the thing. He mentions them specifically by name, but he doesn't mention the problem specifically by name. He says there's a disagreement, but he doesn't plunge into the difficulties of the problem. He doesn't write about any of the details of the conflict. Instead, he writes about two things. The first thing he says is address it. Deal with it. The second thing he says is he gives them a goal to agree in the Lord. All right, the first thing, address the problem, which is a pretty novel thought in our culture in and of itself. It's an election year, so we don't have to talk about all the problems in the nation that we haven't addressed in the last 8 years. How many trillions of dollars in debt are we? Maybe if we just ignore it, maybe the problem will go away. Let's just not deal with it at all whatsoever. You got Benghazi, you got Libya. You know what? It's over. Why do we have to keep bringing these things up? Why are we going to address the problem? Our culture, one of our favorite pastimes is avoiding conflict. A famous psychologist, has said, when it comes to dealing with conflict, we are like ninjas. Into the darkness we go. Avoid, avoid, avoid. Maybe if they don't see me, they'll forget about me. Avoiding conflict is not just a desire to alleviate problems. One of the reasons we hate conflict is because we're scared to address it. And we're scared not necessarily about the conflict. We're scared about what we're going to realize about ourselves in the midst of conflict. We're scared about people that are going to see our dark sides come out, that our response to conflict is not going to be a healthy response. And we don't want people to see that. We want people to see our true colors. And so we avoid it. We avoid conflict. There's Ken Sande has got a book called Peacemakers. It's just an outstanding book on dealing with conflict. And in the initial chapters, he says, in any problem, in any conflict that you come up with, this is a key component of dealing with any problem that would ever come into your life. As he says, you have to ask yourself, what have I done to contribute to the problem? And conflict will take a whole different turn if you can acknowledge that you have a part of it, even if you think you don't have a part of it. What do they say about sexual abuse? Perception is what matters, not intent. Intent has nothing to do with conflict. Perception has everything to do with it. So even if you weren't doing something, if you are perceived as doing something to cause this conflict, then you have something that you can apologize for, that you can own up to. But the person who says, I have no part in this conflict, I am free, I have no additional elements that I'm bringing to this conflict, that's when you begin to have problems. Because there's no humility there. You're perfect. You've never done anything wrong in your entire life. It can't be me. It's not my problem. Mediation begins with asking yourself, what have I done to contribute to the problem? Look how passionate Paul is simply to address the issue, to resolve it, all right, to be resolved to attack the issue and the conflict. Verse 2, I entreat Euodiah. And he could have said, I entreat Euodiah and Syntyche, but he says, I entreat Euodiah and I entreat Syntyche. He repeats the command twice. The appeal is repeated twice. New King James Version. I implore. I implore. I urge, some of your translations will say. This is a strong and a very passionate request on the part of the Apostle Paul. Second, he tells them what to do. Not what the conflict is, but what to do. And what he calls them to do is to agree. The Greek word here, Paul urges them to think a certain way, to set their minds on the same thing. Everything Paul says about the gospel, previously in the book of Philippians, up to this point, he says, now I want you to apply it to this specific problem that you have in chapter 4. We might even say that Paul cares less about what the conflict is and more about how the conflict is dealt with and that it's being dealt with. That's his heart as a pastor. Ken Sande again says this, to some, conflict is a hazard that threatens to sweep them off their feet, leaving them bruised and hurting. To others, it's an obstacle that they should conquer quickly and firmly regardless of the consequences. But some people have learned that conflict is an opportunity to solve problems in a way that honors God. Conflict, like nothing else, is an opportunity to glorify God, to serve others, and to grow to be like Christ. In conflict, you can trust God, you can obey God, you can imitate God, you can acknowledge God. Here's what Ken Sande says. Every time you encounter a conflict, you will inevitably show what you really think of God. By your actions, you will show whether you have a big God or whether you have a big self and big problems. We got to be resolved to deal with conflict. Number 2, we rejoice in the midst of conflict. Look at verse 4. Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. And of course, he repeated that twice for emphasis there because we need to hear it twice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. You know what's shocking about these commands is not the commands themselves. Rejoice in the Lord. What's shocking is the adverbs. It's the frequency of the commands. Rejoice in the Lord always. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything. When Paul does this, he's not just giving us a command for a certain situation in a certain circumstance. He's commanding us to a certain way of life. It's a certain life that's defined by joy and by peace. And remember the context. Paul is writing from prison when he pens this. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. By the way, I'm in chains in this situation. How can the Apostle Paul develop this heart in conflict in the midst of these problems to rise above them, to sit over them, to be poised in them? How can he be beaten 5 times, 40 lashes minus 1, stoned and dragged out of a city, 3 times beaten with rods? How is that even possible? One of the ways it's possible is to be thankful. One of the ways is to pray. One of the ways is to pray very thankfully. And this seems so counterintuitive to our culture. We expect Paul to say, first, make your request be known to God. Then, if you get what you want, then thank Him. That's not what he says. He says, thank God as you ask. In the midst of your asking, in the midst of your prayers, thank Him before you even know how the situation turns out. Look at what Tim Keller says in his book on suffering. He says, Paul is essentially calling us to trust God's sovereign rule over history and over our lives. He is telling us that we will never be content unless, as we make our heartfelt requests, we also acknowledge that our lives are in His hands and that He is wiser than we are. Thankful prayer, Keller says, rests in the truth that God is good regardless of the outcomes and regardless of the circumstances. Look at verse 7. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Christians should be totally different from anyone else because they have peace with God, but we are not. It's partially because we focus on the blessings rather than the blesser, the creations rather than the creator. The other part is so often we have the exact opposite of peace. And the opposite of peace is not hopelessness. The opposite of peace is worry. It's anxiety. It's like a nervousness. You want a kind of a closer definition of true peace. True peace has to do with confidence in God's control, period. In God's control over your life, in God's control over history, of all the events, in God's control of the 2016 election, United States of America. True peace has to do with confidence in God's control. Over half of our anxiety and depression would go away if we weren't so depressed about being depressed. Over half of our sadness that we deal with would go away if we weren't so sad about being sad. If we weren't so anxious about being anxious. Part of this just comes back to our expectations in life. We always have this expectation that life is easy. It's easy street, that things are always going to go well, and that when things go well, something's wrong, something's off kilter. Listen, you're not in control. Sooner or later in life, you're going to figure out that you're not in control. We often realize that, and we freak out about it. And so we plunge into depression and sadness and anxiety and all these other things. And there's a difference in the Bible between peace with God and peace of God. Peace of God is a frame of heart. It's a way of thinking that's constant and it's solid and it's confident in God. It's a trust in God no matter what the situation. And we all want this, but we don't know what it is. We think it's stoicism. You know, we think it's the guy who can approach all of life and be unfrazzled and unshaken. They stand really tall above all situations in life, and usually they don't say a whole lot. They're untouchable. You know, we think it's the Marlboro Man, you know? Like a stampede of 25 Mustangs is going out, and all of a sudden the Marlboro Man shows up on the commercial, and he puts them all in the corral with the snap of a finger. He's got a cigarette in his mouth, and yep. We got this idea of true peace that we're strong enough to handle anything in life. With the right mindset, we can overcome it. Has nothing to do with that. Really nothing to do with stoicism. Greek word for anxiety actually comes from another word that means parts or pieces. You ever notice how a super anxious person can almost be like they have two personalities, like a schizophrenic? They get them in the right situation and they're all frazzled by absolutely everything. They become this different person. They're like all nervous. What am I going to do tomorrow? It's Monday. It's work starting. I got to go. I got to get this done. And on Sunday when they don't have to do anything and go to church and rest and they're all peaceful. Everything's good. Literally at one moment their life is in pieces. The next moment their life seems to be whole. They're same and they're constant in that situation. No matter what's happening, Paul says rejoice in all situations. Rejoice always. Again, I'll say rejoice. Your life isn't falling into pieces if God is in control. If you can acknowledge that and trust that. We resolve to approach conflict. We rejoice in the midst of conflict. And number 3, we reorder our thinking as a result of conflict. These verses we're about to read are the exact opposite of what the world will tell you, both the religious world and the secular world. If you walk into any bookstore, you'll go into a self-help section. You'll find books on grieving, on worry, on anxiety. Almost every single one of them will tell you the exact same thing. They will kick you off into a world of relaxation techniques. I know your world is chaotic. I know you got stuff going on, and it's crazy right now. Have you tried yoga? Have you tried meditating? When's the last time you went on vacation and put out a lawn chair and listened to the waves hit the sand? When's the last time you take a daily walk for 30 minutes in the sun, get your vitamin D? When's the last time? We want to go to this balance between relaxation and rest, and we're out of balance. And so here's what we're going to do to get back into the balance. The whole world will tell you to do something to find true peace. None of the books will ever say this. None of the books will ever say, are you anxious? Are you stressed out? Let's begin by asking the big questions. What's the meaning in life? Why are you here? What's the purpose for what God created you for? Do you think that there's a creator out there? Do you think that this all of a sudden just happened? Let's ask some deeper, penetrating questions. Let's get you to think. No self-help book will ever challenge you to think. None of them will. Their answer to life stress is not to think more, it's to think less. To avoid the problem, to get out of it. Tim Keller says Christian peace operates in almost the exactly opposite way. Christian peace comes not from thinking less, but from thinking more. And not from just thinking more, but thinking more intently about life's deep issues, about the crucial conversations, about the penetrating issues in all of life. Look at verse 8, Philippians chapter 4. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. When Paul calls us to think about what is true and just and worthy of praise, he has something very specific in mind. Whenever he uses this word think, almost every time in the New Testament, logizomai is the Greek word. It almost always refers to this. He doesn't want us to think about blue skies and seagulls. He wants us to think about theology. He wants us to think about doctrine. He wants us to think about the essentials of our faith. He asks us, what do you believe about God? And why is that important? And in the midst of conflict, that should make every difference in the entire world. If you have a strong theology and a good biblical theology. Paul wants us to think about his specific teaching of God's word concerning sin, concerning Christ as the Son of God, concerning God as creator, as redeemer of all things, about his return, about his kingdom, about the core theology. He wants us to think about it. You say, yeah, you're talking about doctrine. I just want comfort. I've got an issue in my life. All I want you to do is tell me some platitude, some comfort, something to make me a little bit happier and take me off this downward slope. Just get me off of it. Do something to take me out of this slide that I'm in. A mentor of mine used to say, don't check your brain at the door in the Christian life. When you really say, I just want comfort, I don't want theology, what you really mean is, don't tell me about the king. I want to be my own king. What you really mean is life is all about me. I'm in a bad place right now, and I need you to help me get into a better place right now. What if Jesus really is the Son of God? What if he really did come to heal and to forgive and to redeem us? What if God created the heavens and the earth, and he gave us all a purpose? What if all of life is going somewhere? What if all of this life and this existence is culminating in the great kingdom of God when we will worship and glorify him forever? What if he really did die on a cross and forgive us of all our sins, not just half of them, not just part of them, but all of them? What if we have full assurance of our faith? What if sin originated in the garden with pride when Adam said, I don't want a king, I want to be my own king? You start asking these deeper questions in the midst of conflict. And again, it changes everything. Either Jesus is on the throne, ruling all things, or it's as good as it gets right now. And if it's as good as it gets right now, you might as well do what you want to do at any time that you want to do it. And what is the definition of our culture and what is going on? Everybody's doing what they want to do when they want to do it because there's no king in the land and they all do what's right in their own eyes. Conflict will really show you who is seated over your life and over your heart. It's either you or it's the king or it's God. It's pretty simple. And it all comes down just to really that one question, is who is ruling over your heart. Verse 9. What you have learned and received. I want to know this really quick. True peace is learned. Peace of God is learned. It doesn't come naturally. It comes supernaturally. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. The peace of God is not something that comes naturally. It comes supernaturally. It's not the absence of anything. It's the presence of someone. It's not an iron will. It's learned. Peace of God doesn't come by ignoring the facts. It comes by facing the facts, thinking over them and through them into a deeper theology. If Paul can stand up in the middle of the Mediterranean when his ship is getting blown into pieces by a storm and say, brothers, take heart. None of you will lose your life in this situation. If Paul can stand up and he can say that, if he has confidence, if he can be poised in the midst of chaos, he has learned it. Later on, he's going to say, I have learned how to be content in all situations. He has learned how to have the peace of God in all situations. And it's something that we can learn too. Some of us aren't quite there, but we're working on it. I'm working on it on a constant basis. All right? There's a difference between the peace of God and peace with God. You can have peace with God, but not have the peace of God. But you cannot have the peace of God if you have no peace with God. That's a package deal. If you want true peace in your life, it starts with the peace with God. And here's the bad news. All of us come into this world no peace with God. All of us come into this world as enemies of God. The wrath of God is against us. Romans 5 refers to the lost as enemies of God. Ephesians says we are separated from God. Because of sin, we are all destined for destruction in hell and to be separated from God for eternity. But God, being rich in mercy and grace, sent his Son to die for us on the cross. And simply by believing in his death and resurrection from the cross 3 days later, we have peace with God that no peace can match on the entire planet. And he didn't pay the penalty for just part of our sin. The penalty that he paid on the cross of Calvary paid for all of our sin. It is past, present, and future. All sins are completely paid for on the cross and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that gives us a full assurance of our salvation. You no longer have to doubt where you're going to go when you die. If you have truly trusted Christ, he has paid for all your sin. He has paid the penalty in full. You are redeemed, and you will be with him forever. Peace with God is a standing. It's our identity. It's based on the gospel. It comes from the gospel by believing in the gospel, and that's it. Charles Spurgeon says, "Oh man, you cannot get your heart right. You cannot get your conscience right. You cannot get your understanding right. You cannot bring your various powers to their bearings and make them act in true harmony until you are first right with God. Spurgeon says the king must occupy the throne, and then the estate of the man soul will be duly settled. But until the chief authority has due eminence, rebellion and riot will continue. And you will spend the rest of your life in rebellion and riot against God. You can never possess peace until you possess Christ in the gospel. It is a figment of your imagination. It is not true peace. Peace of God is different than peace with God. Peace of God is a confidence, it's a trust in God's control of your life. Peace of God is a living power that enables you to face reality and your life not fall apart all the time. It's a mindset to be poised in all circumstances, not in pieces all the time, not a schizophrenic, frantic at one day and perfectly peaceful in another, but it's constant, poised in all circumstances. In that way, peace is seen very individually. Colossians 3:15 is a great verse. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. And when Paul says that, he's speaking individually to Christians. In many ways, he's speaking individually to Christians in Philippians chapter 4. But Philippians chapter 4 is not primarily addressed to the individual. Philippians chapter 4 is primarily addressed to the community. It's primarily addressed to the church in Philippi. In fact, almost every commentator will say that the reason why there's so much about unity in the gospel and humility in the book of Philippians is because they had some real conflicts in the church in Philippi. They had some arguments that needed to be resolved. For Paul in Philippians, peace is primarily not an individual matter, but it's a community matter. Community unrest is lurking, and it's lurking right here in Whitewater Community Church. Paul wants to address it. Every time it rears its ugly head, he wants to address it, and he wants to fend it off. The quicker, the better. So he says, be resolved to address the issues, to address the conflict. Rejoice in your salvation. Reorder your thoughts. And here's the last thing I want to say. It's probably the most important thing about true peace. Peace of God stands or falls on the assurance of your salvation. It's ultimately what it all comes down to. Peace of God in your life will stand or fall on the assurance of your salvation. Your inner peace is determined by what you believe about the gospel. If Jesus took the full penalty of your sin, you can rest assured that you are going to be saved. And regardless of what happens in this life, it's not the end. That's not it. You've got eternity with God and with Christ apart from sin. But if he only took part of our penalty on the cross, if part of it is up to him and the other part is up to us, you will never have peace of God. Never. Because you always try to be measuring up to salvation. Everything depends on you. Everything comes back to you. But you can never completely measure up, which means this. People who have zero peace of God in their life are slipping into works righteousness, and they are completely devoid of the grace of the gospel on a daily basis. Why do people who really understand grace in the gospel have no peace in their life? Let me give you a couple examples of this. Probably the worst conflict I've ever been through in my entire life was before we came here. Previous job that I had. Worst conflict I ever had. They hired a church mediator to come in and to try to deal with the conflict and talk to the mediator a little bit afterwards and discuss some things. I said, what is the worst church conflict that you have ever had in the entirety of your ministry? He was specifically brought on as a church. This is his job, to come on to churches going through difficult times, to mediate those problems, and he was pretty successful in it. He said one of the worst that he ever came into was a situation where he could not get the pastor to own any humility and responsibility in any of the things. So he worked through the restitution, he worked through the process. It was months and months of the process. But at the end of the day, he couldn't own responsibility for any single thing, and so he couldn't apologize for anything. In fact, most of the people on his staff said that they have never, ever heard him apologize or heard any weakness from his mouth or any sin that he struggled with in the whole tenure of his ministry while he had been at the church. And he said the only way they could get that pastor to sit down at the table and come and try to deal to mediate this conflict was if somebody wrote out for him on a piece of paper a paragraph of apology, and then the pastor would then come in and read it for people. That was the only way that they could get him to own responsibility in the conflict. He said that actually the worst of the issues was the issue that we had. And the pastor, after 1 week of mediation, threw in the cards and gave it up, walked away completely. Not interested in dealing with the conflict whatsoever. Because why? He was scared about what he would find out about himself. Not scared about the conflict. Not scared about dealing with the issue. Scared about dealing with himself and his pride and his rebellion against God. Let's just take a really short journey through Philippians and where we've been. Look at chapter 1 in Philippians, verse 21. By the time Paul gets to Philippians chapter 4, he has said so much that he really doesn't even have to say any more about the conflict. Philippians 1, chapter 1, verse 21. For me to live is Christ and to die is gain. Is that somebody who's concerned about their self-image, about themselves at all? He's saying, you know what? I would rather live for Christ, and I would actually die to myself, die to my pride, die to my selfish thinking. I want to live to Christ instead. And his definition of life is Christ. It is not self. It is not his circumstances. Look at chapter 2, verse 3. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others as more significant than yourselves. Another point of ammunition before he gets to the issue in chapter 4. Look at chapter 2, verse 14. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. Chapter 2, you've got a fighter, rebellion against God. You've got a complainer. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. Is that if you can get past those things in conflict, if you can look past yourself, if you can get over your pride and over your rebellion, and if you can humble yourself, then you've got a chance of dealing with conflict in a healthy manner. But if you don't, that conflict will fester. It will not go away. It'll find you. And you will develop a reputation as a very argumentative person, and it will not go away. And everywhere you go, if you do not deal with conflict with humility, if you do not deal with conflict and understand that you have selfish ambition in your life, if you do not deal with conflict and understand that you are a prideful person, that I'm a prideful person, and there could be a chance that I have something to contribute to this problem, that I have sin in my life, it'll stick with you and it'll go with you forever, and you will leave a path of destruction wherever you go. And this is perhaps nowhere seen as great as it is in the context of the community of believers in what we call a church. And what it comes down to is pride and rebellion and selfish ambition. That's what it all comes down to. All of us will fall into these sins for one reason. We don't have the peace of God ruling our hearts. We are ruling our hearts. Our little kingdom is at war with God's greater kingdom. What feels good to me, what sounds good to me, what seems beneficial to me. At the root of that, pride, rebellion, sin, destruction. Humble yourself before the mighty hand of God. And then humble yourself before other people. But if you are confident, fully assured of your salvation, even if you die, you're going to a better place. You can have a peace in your life if you're not married. It's okay. You can have peace, because guess what? Joy in this life has nothing comparable to joy in the life that's ahead of us. It doesn't matter what people think about you. It doesn't matter that you lost that job. Your hope is in Jesus Christ. He is not only the author of your faith, he is the perfecter of your faith, and he will usher you into a perfect glory. You can have true peace. You can have peace of God. You can't have it if you have no peace with God. But you can have peace of God if you are fully assured of your salvation. Let me pray for us, and we'll continue on in this series in Philippians. We've got one more announcement just after I'm done praying, so stick around here. We got a special gift for somebody that's coming up, and then we'll close it off. Let me pray. Father in heaven, Lord, we ask for humility in our lives, to look in the mirror. James has this great phrase that whoever looks into the law of the Lord will see themselves reflected in it. And what he means is he won't see a pretty picture there at times, but he'll see a sinful picture. He'll see reality. Nothing shows us reality, God, like conflict. Nothing shows our true colors, dealing with tough situations and circumstances that we don't want to deal with. Lord, I pray that our community, our church family would be known as people who don't sweep it under the rug, but as people who deal with it, who are resolved to deal with conflict. I pray that we would take the first steps, not only of salvation, but of humility. I pray that as we come across conflicts in our marriages, at our workplaces, on a daily basis, we would think about the gospel in these conflicts. I pray that we would just be people who think to you of your goodness and your grace to us. And ultimately, Lord, I pray that we would have the full assurance of our salvation. And even when things are going so crazy in life, we can have true peace, knowing that you have saved us. You have forgiven us of all of our sins. Lord, I pray that truth would penetrate our hearts, and we thank you for that. We pray this to you, Father, through the Son, and by the Spirit, for you three are the one true God, and there is no God besides you. Amen.